Hey everyone, it's Caleb Porty from Books and Brawn. I just wanted to go over a few books today that I thought would be interesting for anyone that's looking for some horror to read during spooky season. I know we're a little bit the way through the month of October, but these are just a few that I've finished relatively recently that I thought would be good for you to read. So the first one that I'm going to mention, this was the first one I read coming up on October that fits into the horror category. I thought it was really good. It's definitely very grotesque, and that is American Psycho by Bret Easton Ellison. Bret Easton Ellis, excuse me. So this one it was really good, but if you don't have a very strong stomach, I wouldn't necessarily recommend this. To preface me going over these books, these aren't going to be in-depth reviews. It's just going to be kind of a general overview of the book, and if you want to need more in-depth reviews, just let me know and I'll do a full video of them. But this is a very good one. It definitely pushes the boundaries of what would be like socially acceptable in horror, I would say. So if you don't have a strong stomach, if you're not good with, I don't know, there's a little bit of animal abuse in there. It's very misogynistic. It's a it's a polemical work on some of the misogyny and some of the grotesqueness of Wall Street at the time in the 80s. So there's a lot of pushing the boundaries of what's socially acceptable, and it's supposed to be critical of the almost sociopathic tendencies of the people that occupy Wall Street. So it's really interesting, and I thought it was a really good read. But again, if you have a weak stomach, I would be hesitant to read this one. But it is very good, and I definitely would recommend it if you can stomach it. But if you're looking for horror, I assume that you have at least some uh, experience with the horrific. So, but this is probably one of the most grotesque novels I've ever read. So keep that in mind if you decide to read that one. Another one that I went through pretty recently was The Shining by Stephen King. I really liked this. It's actually considered like the magnum opus of Stephen King out of all of his works by many. For me, it wasn't. It hasn't been my. It wasn't my favorite of what I've read of Stephen King so far. I thought it was really good. The parts that like deal with Stephen King's struggle with alcoholism that he included in his writing of this book, I think is why some of the critics and scholars in the literary community consider this to be one of his best works. But I wouldn't say that it's his best in my opinion. Uh, but I could see why that aspect could be appealing to some people. I did think it was really good, but again, it was not my favorite. Looking back, I hadn't read the book before I'd seen the movie. I think that's probably the case with most people. Most people have already seen the movie but haven't read the book. The topiary in the book is the topiary, like the hedge animals. I'm sure you've heard that Stephen King had problems with uh, Stanley Kubrick's interpretation of his book, but in my opinion, some of the cuts that they made and the changes they made for the movie were definitely justified considering it's a different medium of entertainment. So some things need to be changed, I think, and I think the topiary in the book is very good for building the suspense that you need for a novel. So I do think it's very fitting for the novel, but I do see why Stanley Kubrick, at least I can see the reasoning behind taking some of those aspects out of the movie while he's making it. But some people may have issue with that still. But the topiary is very interesting. But again, like I said, I can see why Stanley Kubrick decided to take it out. But I think this is really good. I like the aspects of there's a little bit more explanation behind like the telepathy of Danny in the book, and I think that's really cool. Also, I really liked the portrayal of Dick Halloran in this book, so look out for him. And he was a very good character. I really liked the portrayal of him in this book. Another along Stephen King. This is the one I would recommend over The Shining if you're gonna pick one to read, just around spooky season or maybe towards the end. Although it is a very long novel, the copy I have, this is the first signet printing of it, but it's not a first edition. I guess that's probably nobody cares if they're not like collecting books, but it's cool to me. I've already torn it up a little bit while I was reading, unfortunately, but fortunately it's not a first edition, so I wasn't too concerned about making my annotations and getting it a little bit torn up, especially since it's a paperback signet printing. But anyways, this is the one I would suggest to go into of Stephen King. So if you're going to read one towards the end of spooky season, like I said, it is a very lengthy novel. I think the typical version is around 1300. This one, because it's like a pocket paperback, is like a little bit less than 1100 pages. But it's, they're very dense pages. But I thought this was fantastic. I did take a little bit more time going through it because I just wanted to make sure I was getting as much as I could out of the book. I kind of took it in chunks. Sometimes I would read, I don't know, 100 or however many pages in a sitting. And some other times I just kind of, skim through, not skim through, but read through like 20 or 30 pages or whatever it is. And I kind of just took it in chunks. It is a fairly lengthy novel. Ironically, when I was reading The Stand, I didn't really have as much of an issue with the length of the novel. I don't know if it's just because it feels better spaced out, ironically, because The Stand is longer than it. But at times in this book, it does feel like a slog. There are definitely points in the book where it goes by quick, and there are other points where it can kind of seems bogged down in details. But there's a lot of portions of the book that are very good. I like the portrayal of the monster in the book. That's probably one of my favorite parts of the book. There are several stories within the book that that he's giving backstory on it and like going through the years the creature has been alive or whatever else. I'm trying not to give away too many details, but one of the stories in the book is called The Black Spot, which I really enjoyed. If you've seen the modern renditions of the book in movie form, you may have some familiarity with that. There are some changes in the movie as well. So if you've seen the new movies or maybe the old movies, it's definitely going to be a different experience reading the book. I'm not going to talk too much about the overall plot structure because I don't want to give anything away, but this is the one I would recommend. If you're going to read something, one of the reviews on the back of the novel compared it to Moby Dick. He called it the Moby Dick of horror. I guess it's just a reference to the length of the novel, but it really is fantastic, and I would definitely give it a shot. The diction is very good in the book. There's a few terms that I think are kind of funny. One's beshitted. I thought that was a funny term that I came across in the book. It literally just means covered in shit. So it's fun to see the wordplay and just the clever diction and stuff, specifically for the horror genre that Stephen King uses in this book. And yeah, this Salem's Lot I've done a full review on. That's probably a good book as well for spooky season around. Halloween, if you're wanting something a little bit more manageable compared to like the lengthiness of this novel, Salem's Lot, I think it's a little over 600 pages or so, but when I was reading it, it went a lot quicker. I think the pacing is it's more easily digestible compared to it. I feel like it feels like a bit more of a slog. There's more of it, so I guess that kind of makes sense, but the pacing just feels so quick in Salem's Lot as compared to this. And even The Stand, I feel like the pacing feels quick and it's just constant action, and I guess it's not constant action, but it just feels more continuous. There's more continuity, I would say, in The Stand or Salem's Lot as compared to it. I think it's very good, but I think there's a lot of like backstory and detail and going back and telling stories about just further adding background to his story, which is very good, but I think it does feel like a bit more of a slog because he's focusing more on the backstory. Now, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I do still think it's a very good book. I just wanted to preface that for anybody that goes into this. It is going to be a bit of a slog, I would say, but it's very good. The last recommendation I have for you guys is The Road by Cormac McCarthy. I love Cormac McCarthy. From what I've seen online, there's actually quite a few critics of his work, and I think that's because he's more of a highbrow literary fiction writer or was, rest in peace. He's a terrific author. And it's very sad that I came to his work after he had passed away, but I would highly recommend reading Blood Meridian by him. And then if you want another one of his that I've read that you may like as well, The Road was very good. But I came into this novel thinking it was more along. I guess it is sort of a fantasy novel, but it's very dark. So that's why I'm recommending it for spooky season, Halloween. I think it's a good company. Is a good company to the spooky season. It's very dark. It's very desolate throughout the whole novel. So I will say it's very depressing as well. So if you're not looking for a super depressing read, you may skip this and go for something more like The Shining or It, because those are going to be a little bit more fun reads, not quite as depressing, I would say. If you want something that's a little bit more like excitement, horror, thriller, probably The Shining. It is really great if you're looking for like a really big horror novel to go through. That's gonna have tons of backstory and kind of a little bit more of the fantastical elements. That's the one I would go with. But The Road, I thought it was fantastic. Some of the criticism I saw of it was Cormac McCarthy was trying to incorporate elements of Hemingway's style of writing, where he writes very concise and like with brevity, and he's trying to also incorporate elements of Herman Melville, where he's using elements of what's the word, like the sea and things like that. But there may be some of that combination of like other writers incorporated into Cormac McCarthy's, but I think the criticism is very harsh. I've seen people say that it's just completely boring throughout the whole book. I do not agree with that statement whatsoever. I thought it was really good. I think the underlying theme of hope in the book is really cool. It's just so cool to have that underlying motif with the backdrop of something so desolate in the book. I'm trying not to give away too many details, but I think saying the underlying motif of hope is not giving away anything too much. But would highly recommend. I think a lot of the criticism is unfounded for Cormac McCarthy. I think it's because he's considered a modern classic author that people are so highly critical of his works. They think that because he's so highly praised that it's just unfounded. I disagree. I think his work is really good. I think that's going to continue to show through time. I think people are going to see why his work is so critically acclaimed. I don't think the acclaim is unfounded, is what I'm trying to say. But this is definitely another one I would recommend if you're looking for something that's a little bit more depressing, but also post-apocalyptic, nice, and it is pretty horrifying. I wouldn't say it's a horror novel, more like a post-apocalyptic thriller, and also a form of literary fiction. Ironically, when I got this novel, I was thinking it was going to be more along the lines of like a fantasy, because I just read a brief description from some random Reddit page, I think, online that was talking about the novel, but I didn't want to give too many details away for myself. There aren't any names in the book. Yeah, from what I remember, there's no names in the book, and it's kind of similar to how he does with Blood Meridian that I have sitting back there. The main character in Blood Meridian, the kid, is literally just referred to this as a kid throughout the entire book. It's sort of similar in that way. The two main characters in the book, they just do not have names throughout the book, and it's a really interesting way to write. I really like the ambiguity of books like this. I think it really aids to the reader's imagination because you sort of have to fill in the blanks to what happened. And there's a lot of that in the book. I really like that. But out of all these books, specifically, if I were to recommend you to read any of these for Halloween season, I would pick either It or The Road. It if you're looking for something that's a little bit more horror fantasy sort of style, and then The Road if you want something that's more like post-apocalyptic literary thriller that's also very depressing. I want to really drive that point home, because if you get into this book thinking it's going to be, easy and lighthearted, and I would don't go into it with that mindset, because it's really there's an underlying theme of hope, but it is a very present book. Okay, so those are the 4 horror books that I would recommend for you guys, and I think any of one of those will do very good. American Psycho is unlike anything I've read ever. It's very, very grotesque, and I actually really like a lot of the music descriptions in the book as well. They really play along with the some of the '80s music that I really like. So I think, ironically, the juxtaposition between some of the horrifying aspects in the book and then the detailed descriptions of music are really well. It shows the talent of the author, but also that juxtaposition between the horrifying and then the artistically written uh, descriptions of music is really interesting. And also, it's really cool because there's a lot of Americana in the book, and like the '80s culture and stuff like that. So it's very cool. I really like that book. If you're also obviously, the book itself is very ingrained into American culture. The movie's huge. Christian Bale was ripped and is pretty acclaimed for his physique in that movie, and I think he did a very good portrayal of it. And they cut, ironically, they cut down a lot of the obscene parts of the book. So keep that in mind if you do decide to read that one. One honorable mention. This one I read a little while ago. It is Rimna by Junji Ito. I think I have a review of it on the channel actually, but that's a pretty quick read if you're looking for something a little different to read for spooky season that would also be very quick because it's not to hate on manga, but it's just typically manga is typically easy to get through. And I think his artwork is really fantastic. I have to look into some more of his horror novels, horror manga, because it's not a category of literature that I've read too much of, and I think he does a really good job. And even if you're not, what was I trying to say there? I think it kind of like merges the two worlds of like art and literature, so it's kind of a cool overlap there. And I think because of like the graphic illustrations, it kind of aids a little bit in cementing the horrifying parts of the book too. So that's a really great reason to look into that one too. But yeah, if you guys want like a more in-depth review of any of these books, please let me know. That's all I've got. Thank you.